from the Doha Institute. We would like to host today a very special guest who has a great deal of experience in humanitarian work in the Arab region in particular. Our guest is Antoine Bieler, and he is the humanitarian representatives in the MENA region and North Africa, so in the Middle East and North Africa, the representative of Médecins Sans Frontières. And as you know, this region, it is the first region in terms of the number of conflicts, the level of conflicts, and the impact, negative impact on civil societies. So the existence of MSF in any region is indicator to the existence of problems. And we're going, of course, to listen to Dr. Antoine Bieler about this problem. So this shows that there are so many challenges that exist in the region that we need to deal with. So today, we have asked Antoine to talk about humanitarian diplomacy. So, and as our colleagues and students know, that last year we tried to specialize in a way or another to try to understand the particularity of humanitarian diplomacy, and we have hosted a number of guests to talk about this topic. We had from Turkey a guest who talked about Turkish humanitarian diplomacy. A few weeks ago we had Dr. Mutlaq Al-Gahtani, who talked about diplomatic works in finding solutions to the conflict in the state of Qatar. So Mr. Antoine Bieler is going to talk about this dimension and would like to shine light on the retreat on in terms of the work of balanced humanitarian work, the multilateralism, the international participation when it comes to humanitarian work. So Antoine Bieler has a very extended experience in this field, and he is the representative of Médecins Sans Frontières in the Middle East and North Africa in the last 10 years. So we're celebrating the 10th anniversary of his work at Médecins Sans Frontières. And before that, he worked in the ICRC and the International Committee for the Red Cross, the ICRC, and he worked in Geneva in the presidency. And also he worked in the different ICRC missions in different countries, either as head of the mission or deputy head of the mission in a number of countries such as Iran, Pakistan, Lebanon, and Jordan. Welcome, Mr. Antoine Bieler. Thank you very much for you that you have had the time to share with us your experience. So we would like to ask you, first of all, to speak for about 20 to 25 minutes. And after that, we're going to enter into a discussion, questions and answers with our audience present with us here today. So I would like to bring to your attention that this meeting is being broadcast live on social media, the website of the Doha Institute, and would like also to welcome questions from persons following this event on social media. You can leave a question on your website, and my colleagues will give me the question that you posed to pose it on Mr. Antoine Bieler.
I'll be speaking in English. أيها السيدات والسادة أصحاب السعادة، شكرا جزيلا لكم لحضوركم معنا، وأنا سعيد للغاية لأن هذه هي المرة
15 to 18 months, so it feels extremely heartwarming to have faces, eye contact, and ability to re-engage with in normal settings. I'm going to make few preliminary remarks, and I will hint at few concrete examples from our work, but please feel free to dig in these examples later in the Q&A. So I mean, there is no agreed upon definition of humanitarian diplomacy. So to make it as simple as possible, I mean, humanitarian diplomacy is an activity that is conducted by a number of different actors, such as states, international organizations, NGOs, religious organizations, corporations, and individuals. The aim is to obtain from political and military powers a space where to operate with as much integrity as possible. And beyond obtaining this access to the people we are trying to help or provide assistance to, it's important also that we maintain this access and the effectivity of it. It is carried out with means that are very traditional to diplomacy, through negotiation, communication, signing of agreements, formal or informal, with formal or informal entities. For example, in Afghanistan, Doctor Without Borders, or MSF for its French acronym that I will use in the presentation to refer to the institution I'm working for. So in Afghanistan, MSF has signed a memorandum of understanding with a variety of armed actors that are on the ground, as an example. It is also like traditional diplomacy. It can be discreet or it can be public, it can be official, it can be informal, and so for that it has a lot of in common. What is interesting, and I think it's quite of a contradiction here, putting humanitarian and diplomacy together, because if you ask humanitarians, none of them would see themselves as diplomats, because diplomacy is the engagement between one political system and another, while humanitarians are doing their best to stay away from politics. Also, diplomacy is made of compromise and deals, while humanitarian action is principled, meaning it's neutral, it's independent, and it's impartial. So how come humanitarian aid actors can make compromises? So at MSF, our humanitarian diplomacy is very much driven by field realities. It is mostly my colleagues at field level that are basically asking us to engage on very specific issues that are supposed to have an immediate impact on their ability to work. And if I have to summarize my work in the region, I'm trying to develop a network of people that we can activate in order to facilitate our operations. And this network is quite wide. It goes from government to armed groups. It goes from charities to Red Crescent societies, and it goes from medical associations to religious leaders. However, we do not shy away from engaging on policy frameworks, because we know that some debates are at a macro level, have a strong influence on the way humanitarian aid is conceptualized and deployed. So we in this situation, we of course try to have a say in order to protect principled humanitarian action. And one example is, for example, when we basically worked with members of the United Nations Security Council to issue a resolution on the protection of the medical mission. But I can again, elaborate on that later. Another policy framework where we are very much involved with, and I'll come to that later, is the counter-terrorism discussion. Moving to multilateralism and the stance that is made in the title of this presentation. Yes, we feel strongly that we live in an era of weakened multilateralism, and this predates the arrival of Trump at the White House. This is for us more consequences than the origin of it. It has been years since we've seen the erosion of norms, the decline in globalism, the rise of nationalism and populism. that have like very strong impact on our work. It is, to a certain extent, I would say, a sort of a race to the bottom from the states, who basically just look at each other to adapt their behaviors and do not anymore take into consideration some of the international instruments that they have signed. And the concrete example of that is the total incapacity of the Security Council to address meaningfully the ongoing conflict, from Ukraine to Afghanistan, from Syria to Yemen, in South Sudan. I mean, there are multiplication of crises where there is a very clear lack of our capacity to provide both a political and a humanitarian response. We see that also, although it is not of a concern directly for us, but it has an impact on our work, with the reduction of funds that are provided to agencies, mostly of the United Nations, but also other humanitarian actors. It is both the relinquishing legal obligation from state to support action, but also relinquishing historical commitments. In this case, I'm thinking about the U.S. That has been historically the biggest donor to UNRWA, the UN agency in charge of Palestinian refugees, who decided from one day to the other to completely or to reduce and then stop their funding. Another important example that is dear to us, because we work a lot on we have a lot of projects in favor of migrants. It is the 1951 Refugee Convention, where many of its signatories have completely abandoned their responsibilities, rather turning towards deterrence measures to keep people who are fleeing the terror of war zones or oppression at home, keeping them at bay. Be the EU externalizing their borders to neighbor countries, non-EU members. Be it in the case of Sahel and Afghanistan, where basically humanitarian and development aid is traded against controlling migration flux by these countries. I mean, just one important point. I'm absolutely not trying here to say that it was much better before. I mean, there wasn't a golden age of humanitarianism. I mean, humanitarian action has always been the result of negotiations, of interest, and compromises. I'm just trying to take stock of the present situation and to show how we adapt to that. And so, at the end of the day, the questions for humanitarian actors is, how far are you ready to go in these compromises without completely losing your soul or the principle you're supposed to defend? So, on the concrete consequences of this I would say weakened multilateralism on our work, and especially for those involved in humanitarian diplomacy, it's the multiplication of layers of engagement. A few years back, we could, in the field, sorted out most of our problems talking to the mayor, to the chief of police, to the warlord, to the elders, or the religious leaders, and very rarely had to escalate when we were confronted to a given problem. I think nowadays, in many occasions, field issues are treated at least at national level, often regional and international level. So it means that there have been first multiple level or multi-level engagement, which has as a consequence the increase of the number of actors, and as I mentioned earlier, most of our ability to work is the result of compromises made with these actors, which means that there are much more somehow appetite to satisfy, so which renders these discussions much more complicated. And a corollary to that is the extension of the time frame, meaning that you need to have an alignment of interests of a very big number, of a growing number of actors to be able to access a place or carry on with your humanitarian activity. And this means that the discussions and negotiations are taking far more time than before, which is a problem for humanitarian organizations that are mostly in an emergency mode. And having to wait weeks or months to access a population that is in need, it's extremely frustrating. And obviously, and that's going back to diplomacy. If we look at peace processes, for example, they are for us excruciatingly long, whether in Yemen or in Syria or in Libya, for example, and we are also facing international players who are not only discussing anymore about one crisis, but they are putting many crises in the same negotiation, which render the issue even more thorny and complex. Another concrete example is the global war on terror, and this has had a very strong impact on humanitarian actors. Post-2001, states have started to look at non-state actors, whether they're local or transnational, very differently than before, and they started to put some limits and hurdles to the deployment of humanitarian aid in areas that are under the control of these non-state armed groups. Furthermore, some of them having been labeled terrorist groups, countries have issued unilateral sanctions, making it extremely difficult for humanitarian actors to operate in these places. And one of the most recent example is the designation by the US of the Houthis in Yemen as a foreign terrorist organization. And this entails like a quite dramatic complexification, I don't know if this is an English word, of our work. And I mean, this can also be addressed in the Q&A. But very concretely, in what is considered as one of the worst humanitarian crises nowadays, there are a lot of organizations that are considering to just leave Yemen because the legal risk entails by remaining in Yemen while the Houthis being under section is too big for them. I think probably the most vivid and still present example of this weakened multilateralism is the COVID-19 crisis and how countries have basically isolated themselves in front of a global health issue, and probably or certainly the first total global health problem we ever faced. And so as a practitioner, we had, without entering the utmost difficulties since March last year to not only protect our existing programs, but also to try to develop new program in response of COVID-19 patients. And so, frankly, my work has been for so many months talking with airlines, talking with governments, trying to get visa waivers, cargo, trying to purchase personal protection equipment. I mean, very mundane task, but that were almost impossible at that time. I mean, it's probably going a bit better, but as you know, it keeps changing, and the regulation that are put in place are preventing us in many places to do our work properly. So I'll conclude with few, at least if not positive note, at least positive perspective. This weakened multilateralism has brought onto the scene, humanitarian scene, but also on the humanitarian diplomacy scene, a growing number of actors away from the traditional, I would say, northern hemisphere part of the world. So there have been countries that have developed a very assertive humanitarian action. They have countries that have decided to engage more. And then so for us as humanitarian actors, it has opened the possibility of engagement. It has brought also new ideas, and that we might agree or disagree with, but I think it brings a bit of richness in the debate. And the consequence of that is that in the field of humanitarian diplomacy, there have been also a growing number of actors coming from different parts of the world. And I mean, Qatar is one of the example. And this has brought new codes, new behavior, new ideas, which I think are absolutely welcome in a world where the location of the crisis basically spread all over the planet. And I think that bringing mediators and humanitarian negotiators from all these different parts of the world has brought some positive development, and again open a wider range of options. And last, I think, interesting development, and so MSF has been engaging over the last decade with regional organizations, which for many of them have been engaging into an active discussion on humanitarian issues, even setting up some collective response. And so these are, again, institutions that have developed their own codes, their own way of working, but has had quite productive ability to deploy and to respond mostly to natural disaster, for example, in the case of Asia, but in Africa as well. And so that's with my last point. How come regionalism could potentially be stepping up in the meantime to this weakened multilateralism, and maybe provide a smaller scale response, a smaller scale approach to problems, and potentially find easier solution than the one that are difficult to find by others, as I mentioned earlier, the Security Council. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Antoine. This was
شكرا جزيلا أنطوان. إذا كان هذا رائعا، لقد صورت صورة معقدة وتشكل تحديا، وعرضك أثار الكثير من الأسئلة. وهنا أريد أن أبدأ بعملية إدراج المنظمات الإرهابية الذي أصبح نمطا، خصوصا عندما يتم الأمر بشكل أحادي الجانب. هل بإمكانك أن تتحدث عن عملية مثلا عملية الإدراج التي حدثت مؤخرا، التي تمت فقط من قبل الولايات المتحدة، لم تتم على مستوى الأمم المتحدة؟ هل بإمكانك أن تشرح لجمهورنا، لأن ليس الجميع يعرف لماذا المسألة مهمة، أن الولايات المتحدة لديها أثر كبير على عملياتكم؟ لأن هذا يمنع أي شخص من التعامل مع الحوثيين بشكل مباشر، وهذا الأمر يسيطر على آلية التجارة.
Yemen is a country where 90% of the consumed goods are imported. It is very little production, so they're completely dependent on what's coming from the outside. So then, putting the Houthis on the section means that you're not allowed to trade with them. You're not allowed to buy fuel. I don't know if you maybe sorry, just because I have more of a echo. Yeah, thank you. So you're not allowed to buy fuel. You have all these limitations that put you at risk of legal procedures in the U.S. if ever you are considered as supporting the Houthis in a way or the other. So I mean, this regime of sanctions comes with exemptions, which are quite large in the case of Yemen, but still, it's still too much of a risk for some NGOs to continue operating, because you're never at the mercy of finding one, of a judge finding one invoice here or trade with a certain organization that is related to the Houthi, and then basically accusing you of favoring this group.
Okay, so it has to do with trade, with the use of US dollar,
yeah,
with the US influence, shipping companies, everything will start to...
Yeah.
Now the follow-up question, what about MSF? What position have you taken in vis-a-vis these decisions? Have you continued to operate and willing to communicate despite this designation or not?
Yeah, well, it's not the first sanction regime that we've been confronted with. There are other countries that have I would say, received the same, are in the same situation. So definitely for us, our intention is to continue to operate. However, we do engage, and it's an ongoing negotiation to make sure that these exemptions are as wide as possible and are, I mean, do apply to us as well. We don't feel that we are immune from these issues. We are in a very different situation than NGOs that are, for example, receiving money from the US government, because we receive most of our money from private donors. So that we don't have this fear that suddenly we will lose this financing because of the sanctions. However, we have an office in the US, and then we don't want that at one point Doctor Without Borders is accused of having violated the sanctions, because potentially the consequences are very high. But it's clear that we are in this permanent negotiation with states, and we're now talking about the Houthis, but it's happening in Syria, it's happening in Somalia. So it's a growing threat for humanitarian action. So beyond very concrete example like the Yemen one, we do engage with all governments to make sure that whenever there is a sanction regime, they do introduce very solid exemptions for humanitarian workers, be it MSF or anyone else.
Okay. And in terms of the relationship between humanitarian work and diplomacy, I mean, you rightly presented it as a dilemma in certain ways, that in humanitarian work you have a set of principles, you want to stick to them because it is those principles that allow you to operate anyway, while in diplomacy you tend to compromise. Now, inevitably, when you enter diplomacy with a humanitarian intention, there are some compromises.
Absolutely.
And those compromises, you mentioned the way at the state level we started to trade migration vis-a-vis humanitarian aid, which obviously we'll come back to, it's a huge problem. But at the level of an operation in Syria, where you are working in an area that is largely controlled by a non-state actor, where do you draw the red line? I mean, they don't have legitimacy, they're operating against the international system. Where do you draw the red line in terms of relationship with this type of groups?
So everyone, as I said, they're making compromise. We do make a lot of compromises. Mm-hmm. We have our principled approach, but we keep having to somehow dent it with adapting to the situation. And so there are many examples for where we have had to accept to make some concessions. This it's very clear. Now our red lines are mostly related to access to our patient, making sure that the access is unlimited, and it's not basically aiming at a specific population or part of the population, and that we have a leeway to engage in medical programs that we believe are relevant and necessary on the ground. So after that, it really depends on what are the requests that the interlocutors we have put on the table. It's really varied from one place to the other, and we will always try to be as neutral, as impartial, and independent as possible. We do not engage with like we're making sure that we're not seen under the protection of a certain armed group or certain authorities. We make sure that everyone around knows that we are here in favor of the population, And if we don't feel that we are in a position to do that, then we would not start, or we will at time decide to leave.
But I mean, you've worked also with ICRC before.
Yeah.
And there is maybe a fine difference, but an important one in the way both organizations adhere to the principles.
Yeah.
ICRC will just remain silent, mostly, try not to speak up if they see atrocities involving those same armed groups that you're trying to help the communities where they are present and so on. MSF takes a slightly different position, no? You try to stand up for the principle, you do speak against those organizations, or as some academics accuse some organizations of targeting the state because it's a soft target. I mean, the state, it's not soft in terms of power, but it's an obvious one.
Yeah.
And we speak very quickly when the states take a wrong decision. But when those actors misbehave according to the principles, what would be the MSF reaction to this?
It really varies from one place to the other. We have, in certain occasions, believed that going public was really in favor of the patient we were trying to access, or we were providing care to. And in other occasions, we've decided that going public would be detrimental to our presence, and we decided to stay silent. So we have like very vivid and intense conversation internally about communication, and it's always a calculus between what's the potential outcome and the risk. And there are places where indeed we've been speaking out on many occasions. There are others, like in the case of Myanmar, for example, where we had massive programs in favor of the Rohingyas at the time when they were living in northern Rakhine style, where we knew that speaking out would basically mean the closure of our program. And considering the number of patients we were treating at that time and the lack of other medical response, then we decided to have a low profile. So it's never a given. We have, as you said, that we have probably communication as a clear tool of influence, but we don't activate it every time.
And just to press you on this, because it's very important, I think, also for our students. Can you just describe the mechanism in which you take such an important moral decision? I mean, people's lives are at stake.
Yeah.
And you decide that you stick in or you withdraw.
Yeah.
How is that decision made? Is it made at the local level? Is there a council of elders within MSF with a bit of background, I don't know, on law, morality, understanding, so on? They come and talk about these issues. Is it done in Geneva? Is it done in Paris?
It's at the level of the director of operations. I mean, they are the one who decide where does MSF work and where to draw the line when things are becoming too complicated or too dangerous. So this is, usually at this level, it's inside the operation department.
And then the whole organization will back up that decision.
Yeah,
right to the end.
Yeah, there will be quite some solidarity, because also it would be basically justified or explained on solid grounds. I give you one example. In one country of the region where we were in a hospital where there were two operating theaters, and one was basically run by an armed group, and they were in charge of their own people, and the other one, we managed it. It was a maternity, and at one point this group said, okay, look, we are planning to turn this OT into a second OT for our people, so we would like you to change the profile of your patients, and we said no, and we get on a negotiation for a few weeks, and then eventually we left. Although we had quite a substantial input of money, and our presence was quite valuable for helping in the delivery of pregnant women, but then they wouldn't change their minds. So would us as well.
So clearly, your financial independence and your ability not to rely on state sources for funding gives you this amazing flexibility to make those decisions and so on, which is quite admirable. But you also mentioned something, I think it's the first time we probably talk about it, the way you are building a network in the region of potential people, organizations, states, could be armed groups, etc., who could help you resolve issues. Can you describe a particular event where you had to bring these sort of actors together, or how does it work?
It's from very mundane task, like last week. I had colleagues who came to Doha to discuss with the Taliban. So from just to talk to the Qatari MFA to obtain permits for my colleagues to come. So up to very different approach, trying to bring together the different armed groups to mostly allow us to operate. Our role is really to find, through negotiation, to find a common ground with groups or whomever. Actually, it's a group. It could be political power. Whomever is in charge of a given place or territory where we intend to work. And for that matter, we decide that we have to talk to everyone. We do not bunkerize ourselves. We don't have physical protection. For us, it's essential that we have anyone that wants to have access to us has that.
And the last question from my side, and then we'll turn to you, is the issue of what sounded like a reversal of progress in terms of humanitarian and development activities and commitment, despite the fact that now we know more about it, now we understand better. I think now we have better practices. Even the whole response in the Middle East, in Jordan, in Lebanon, has shown quite innovative ways to handle humanitarian. At the same time, the donor countries seem to take a reverse, different direction. You mentioned funding is becoming more limited. States are becoming more self-focused. COVID obviously did not help. It has left them all look inward. But we also witness a new phenomenon. Maybe in Britain, maybe our colleagues from Britain can speak about it. DFID, which was seen as one of those very important leading agencies, independent at the ministerial level, has now been merged with the Foreign Office, and few countries followed suit. They are now bringing development and humanitarian closer to politics. Do you see that helping in terms of humanitarian diplomacy, in the sense that it has shortened the distance between politics and action, or hindering, in that it could allow humanitarian work to be swallowed by the political objective? From your perspective as an agency that seeks to be as independent as possible.
Yeah, I don't know the reason behind this merging, but I think that this closeness at country level between aid and politics has always been there. I mean, it is the win hearts and minds that the U.S. had after post-2001. So again, states have interest, so they orient their aid and the support to some countries where there is a good reason to do that for themselves. So for us, this is the issue is not there. The issue is when this decision entails limitations or problems for other independent organizations. That Qatar or Switzerland, where I'm coming from, decide to support this country rather than that one. This is their choice and the decision. But we're more concerned about the way this operation is taking place, the eventual, as I said before, this eventual condition that are put to that, and if it goes alongside to principle the humanitarian action, why not? If it has purely strictly political or a military objective, then it's becoming an issue, because it's at the end of the day firing back on us. And if just to make the link with the counterterrorism framework, at the end of the day, what's interesting is that at the end of the day, humanitarian actors end up being able to work nowhere in this sensitive places, because either you, on the one side, you have a sanction regime, which is very threatening, and And on the other side, you have the perception from these armed groups that actually you are too close from the very same people who are putting sanctions that are actually like hindering your work. And it's and if I take the Sahel, for example, it's a zone where it has become almost impossible to work. Also because you have military interventions that are basically like extremely present, and where the local population or armed group might see international organizations or international NGOs as collaborating or getting too close, or worse, being informant of this military. So it's for us the problem is more this mix rather than a political decision to orient an aid in one direction rather than the other, which is totally in the remits of any given country.
Wonderful, thank you very much. I'll take some questions from the audience. You see, you've triggered a lot of questions. I must start with His Excellency the Ambassador, and then I'll come back to you. إذا عندنا مايكروفون إذا سمحت ودي. ودي امشي وعدل بنفس الوقت.
I don't take questions from professors, right? Just to make it clear here.
They're all independent.
Yeah. But they're all too much well-versed into these issues.
Okay. Thank you very much, Antoine, for this very interesting, stimulating presentation and discussion. I would have two questions, following a little bit up on what you said. Maybe if you could describe to us, because the challenges are, I think, similar for all humanitarian organizations and also state actors in a crisis context. So how do we have to imagine eventually teaming up also when you negotiate the conditions of access to a certain zone? We do team up with ICRC, we do team up maybe with donors, humanitarian actors in a given crisis context. And probably I would assume that it depends on the situation and so on. But at the end of the day, you're in the same boat, but you have different approaches. And the second question will be about compliance. The deals that you have then negotiated with the actors in a war zone, in a conflict zone, how are they enforced? It's a big word, but how is the compliance response in those days? Probably it has also become more complicated.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. So for sure. I mean, I think we are fiercely independent and trying to protect that at time probably too much. But of course, we are very much involved with other humanitarian actors in many places. And actually, and this allows me to come back to that. So this United Nations Security Council Resolution 2286, I mentioned briefly. On the protection of medical mission, we teamed up with the ICRC at New York level to push the Security Council to adopt this this resolution. And just to make the link with the erosion of norms, what is interesting, it is not a new, it is not a resolution that states anything new. It just like restates existing laws, and it was just like as a reminder at a time where hospitals were bombed like massively in Yemen and Syria, but also in Afghanistan. In Yemen, MSF has been bombed 5 times by the coalition, which is probably a world record for one coalition. It was just a reminder that actually there are laws that all of you have signed as member states, and that if you could maybe remember that. So I mean, this is one example. In the field, we do work a lot with other organizations. At time with the UN in advocacy. We do things our own ways, but we do. So I wouldn't say we coordinate, but we have a lot of exchanges to make sure that on specific issues we do have a common approach. I take another example now. We are pushing to have a sort of coordinated approach is on Al-Hol camp in northeast of Syria, where you have 63,000 people, mostly Syrian and Iraqis, and 11,000 third country nationals. And these are other victims of counterterrorism measure, because most of the country these people belong to do not extend to them the minimum services they should, are not ready to accept them back home. So, for example, so we're going to probably try to get together. I mean, the more desperate the situation is, the more we tend to, and of course, when it's quite easy for us to work, then we tend to remain on our own.
If you allow me to come back on this, maybe press you further.
Yeah.
Compliance by non-state actors.
Yeah.
How do you guarantee compliance?
I'm coming to that, and I'll answer His Excellency's question because I didn't answer your previous question of giving a concrete example of negotiations. So the compliance. Well, it's very tricky because we do have a very different level of compliance, and I'll give one example which cost us dearly. In 2013, we had like a massive presence in northern Syria. We had 7 hospitals. We were the only organization with international staff present, I mean, permanently in the opposition area. And we have up to 80 staff. And then, over a matter of months, you had the Islamic State that took over the big part of this area, where actually we were already present. So they saw at that time an interest to have us there, because they just arrived, they didn't have any capacity to provide or deliver the services, and so they saw their interest to have us stay there. And so we had agreement with, there were different emirs, in each area was so we had oral agreement, we had official paper, we have tiny bits of paper like this, but basically for a few months, for a good 9 months, we could continue to operate, until in one area, because I mean, for many different reasons, then suddenly they changed their mind, and so we suffered the kidnapping of 5 of our colleagues, which led to the complete. I mean, we completely left the areas under ISIS control, and so we faced problematic issues with compliance in that case. Although what is interesting is that other responsible in other areas of northern Syria under ISIS control would keep calling us and say, well, I mean, we're not responsible for what happened in that area. We told you, and it's true. We told you we can guarantee your security in that place. And so like, why are you leaving my zone? Anyway, so no, it's how do you say? It's again it's again an issue of interest. I think it always comes back to come down to that. Although I don't want to simplify too much. But in that case, this group had an interest to have us stay, and probably slowly they developed their own medical response, and we know. I mean, for example, we found out, probably too late as well, that while we were this kidnapping, while we were the unique humanitarian player, medical player and a service provider in that area. Few months after, there were actually 4 or 5 other hospitals that have developed, and so we were maybe less useful. So as long as the people we engage with see an interest or a good reason for us to stay, I think they're going to comply. And I'll finish quickly with the issue of Afghanistan, but other groups, so often sanctions or limitation of access to these groups are put by state or government that doesn't want any agreement between the humanitarian organization and this group, because it's conferred them certain legitimacy. Yeah. So also, even you have sometimes on purely diplomatic level, you have a compliance just because they can say, well, we have an agreement, and so we are back somehow back into the game, into the diplomatic community by having this recognition, although it's not the one they are expecting, but it's already a beginning.
In terms of their interest, sorry, just to clarify this, would you treat their fighters or not? I mean, do they see you part of their interest is that there is a possibility to treating war injuries of their own fighters, or?
We are treating patients, so regardless of their,
we don't ask.
It includes anyone that arrives at the door for a clinic or hospital with a disease, with a sickness, with an injury, and then so we do not differentiate, and we're not interested to know. Now, coming back to example I gave earlier, when we received the specific request to become basically having the majority of our patients being fighters, and being asked actually to provide medical support to fighters, then we would not accept. It's a very different different thing.
Thank you so much. We'll take another round of questions. Ghassan, Dr. Ghassan. I suggest that you keep the microphone on all the time. Omar, they have to switch it up there.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sultan and the Center for organizing the talk today, and thank you, Antoine, for coming. And I just want to know more about the operational environment in MSF. From another point of view, with the other organization fearing the American punishment when they are challenging the American sanction, they are expecting that their staff will be stopped in the airport. They will be expecting that their bank account will be closed. They're expecting that money transaction will be stopped. In MSF, when they are taking decision, for example, in working in an environment or in a country that it is classified like working in Gaza, working in Syria, or work in Yemen now, what MSF fear? Has it happened before that their money transfer has been stopped? One of their staff is being stopped in Western airport or taken to jail. So this is the first question. And the second one, it is on another angle of a humanitarian diplomacy. And speaking specifically on the war on terror, and speaking about a humanitarian organization after the war on terror, mainly the victim of the measures taken by Western government has been the Muslim organization in the West and Arab organization in the Middle East. Good number of organizations has been closed, number of organizations has been under attack. Big organization has been severely attacked since 2001 until now. Media attack, government measures, and recently speaking about the banking de-risking measure that has been taken against those organizations. Some big organization has taken measures to support those Muslim organizations, specifically the Norwegian Refugees Council, working with Muslim organizations on things on financial de-risking. I'm asking about MSF as a leading world organization, and I have seen you, Antoine, in the Middle East for the last 10 years in different meetings, Cairo and Qatar here. What steps has been taken by MSF to protect their peer organization, speaking about Muslim organization in the West and Arab organization in the Middle East?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so about your first question, we really adopt an approach where we do not want to see our operations reduced because of the threat of sanctions and their consequences. And so as I said before, our financial independence is already like a great asset because we do not risk having funds from certain governments being stopped or else. Now, of course, there is always the legal possibility of people being arrested or the charity itself to be accused of supporting terrorism. You have this case of an aid worker. I don't remember when, a few years back, that was like basically tried because he was working in Somalia and giving international humanitarian law lectures to the Al-Shabaab, and so this was considered, I think, by a court in the U.S. as material support to terrorism. So I think you never at the, I mean, you always are at the mercy of one mistake or perception issue that suddenly can put you into big trouble. So again, we do engage with governments to make sure that the way we work is understood and accepted, that we have to talk to everyone, regardless of their status and definition and else, and that we are able to operate under our modalities, and that these modalities are respected. And as I said again before, we do at the same time make sure in our negotiations that the strongest possible exemptions are declared or issued to protect humanitarian action. That's our main way of handling that. On the second question, well, we are fiercely. There are two characteristics, like fiercely independent organization at MSF, and also very pragmatic. So we do, and answering to the question of His Excellency, we do engage when there are reason to engage and possibilities to do so. So in the Middle East, very concretely, we have had many collaborations with organizations from we had an MOU with Qatar Charity at one point. We had agreement with Qatar Red Crescent. So we do not, but these agreements are extremely focused, oriented to a specific program, are time bound. So that's the way we engage. And so we had never been approached by any of these organizations that we've been expanding a relation with. Never been approached to basically make a statement or comment or provide any support. So and then so again it would depend on the circumstances, on the issues. I mean, we are. Come back to communication. One of the key principles in our communication is to have first-hand information. So, for example, on the bombing of hospitals in northwest Syria, we have often been approached. Say, why don't you say anything? Say, well, because we're not on the ground anymore, and we don't know why this. And it's a bit the same thing in this situation. We can talk about a certain organization at the level of what we've been doing with them in a given, but what happens at management level, where they get their money from, where et cetera, it's much beyond our capacity to comment on in a meaningful way with substantiated element.
Thank you. Henry, can you please?
Thank you. Henry Volans, British Embassy, Doha. I had two questions. One, at the start of 2021, do you see any signs for optimism in the outlook for multilateralism? And I'm thinking of, among other things, a new US administration. Secondly, just to come back to Sultan's point, Sultan mentioned that the UK's Foreign Office and Aid and Development Agency merged a few months ago. I think, actually, to answer Sultan's question, one, I hope positive aspect of that will mean that every single one of the Britain's around 200 missions overseas will have a development remit, whereas before not all had a presence on the ground. But my question to you would be, do you have any advice or have you any good examples of best practice in humanitarians and diplomats working together? Thank you.
Okay. Your first question is for the professors of the graduate institutes. Frankly, I mean, my guess is as good as yours. So, well, we shall see. I think that first we are still in a COVID-19 crisis, and I think this has shown how, I was about to say despicable, but it's probably a bit too much. But I mean, has shown, how turning towards, inward looking from countries have found absolutely amazing extent that probably we would never imagine in the 21st century. And as I said before, furthermore confronted to like a major global health issue, which would have required probably a bit more of a, I completely understand that, I'm not criticizing, but so it's difficult to imagine that how long it will take to recover from that, and that to slowly, because it has brought an amazing chance for countries on border issues, because everybody has isolated itself from the others. So the reopening will probably timid, selective, and it will be always very, very easy to use COVID-19 excused as suddenly, like this morning, your country announced like 22 countries. People coming from 22 countries where the strains are will not be allowed to get into your country. And probably on the very solid scientific ground, but well, probably there's going to be a lot of play around that. I mean, although the EU have decided to have their own policy of allowing each other, which means basically disenfranchising themselves from scientific evidence. Because because you're an EU member as a Polish, you can go anytime to Spain. Then why then you make so much effort to decide between Canada and Australia and others who are allowed to come? So I'm afraid it will continue. And again, I think it's a formidable excuse to justify about everything. And I think it has been an amazing chance for countries for autocratic regime and all countries that were facing demonstration or opposition. Suddenly everybody home. But anyway, that's another, and this is beyond the scope of my work. On the collaboration, yeah, they are. I mean, we need states, and that's why I think it's a funny ambivalence between putting these two words, humanitarian and diplomacy, together, because there is this very strong rejection, even internally. I'm part of a team which is called Humanitarian Representation Team, but we were supposed to be called Humanitarian Diplomacy Team. And even inside MSF, there's been huge debates like, no, but diplomacy is too much linked to state. But I mean, we are doing exactly the same work, except without the credentials of diplomats. So yes, so all this to say that, like with my example of the Security Council resolution, there are a lot of humanitarian problems that are far beyond our ability to respond to them. And that's where we need states to intervene collectively, individually, and that's why also I'm here in Qatar, is to engage with this government, among many others, because they have outreach capacity, interest, leverage, connections that sometimes we don't have, and so we are actually permanently in a discussion with many states to either push them to us to act, or sometimes more politely requesting their assistance. I mean, it's a very different level of, and yes, there have been they are very successful collaboration between these two worlds, humanitarians and diplomats. Also because humanitarian aid is an important part of now almost every government. It's part of their soft power. So there is an interest also from their side to get closer to humanitarian actors.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Fattah. Because of the translation, you need to speak to the mic.
Thank you very much, Antoine, for being with us again in Doha. I know Antoine for quite some time. And it's heartwarming not only for you. I think I received in my Facebook page a colleague from Kuwait saying that's great that we have Antoine in Doha now making a face-to-face kind of presentation. Thank you for that. My question would be, Antoine, is that humanitarian diplomacy is about pragmatism, while humanitarian action is about ethics. Now the question is, where is the fine line between pragmatism and ethics? And this has been, of course, a challenging issue anyway for academics or for practitioners in the field. That's the, of course, ground realities are the ones that makes you really where to push your decision to this side or the other side. Definitely, MSF is an independent with a great history, of course, being a vocal organization, and of course it has its own financial independency and so on that has created really a history of MSF in terms of being a great organization that is admired. And it's a Nobel laureate as well as a humanitarian action organization. Now, the second thing is there is no doubt that the COVID-19 era and the post-COVID-19 era has impacted basically the global aid agenda. Concerns for cut in budgets of aid, whether humanitarian or development, while we have great agendas, SDGs and others basically, are quite alarming. And experts yesterday were talking about it, probably in The Guardian or somewhere, that these cuts are going to affect the future of basically humanitarian aid. And now the question is, while we have still conflicts going on, COVID-19 is still there with us, and we don't know what's the next kind of pandemic. And of course, you are an organization that works in the field of health, and we have issues around the vaccine in terms of sufficiency and so on in many places, including the fragile areas and countries. What is the strategy of MSF really dealing within this kind of, first of all, the humanitarian dilemmas of ethics and pragmatism, and second is, of course, issues related to access within conflict contexts, as well as within the big elephant that we have in the room, which is COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Look, our work is obviously driven by medical ethics. So this is really like a clear red line, and then something that would be like a guidance for all of my colleagues when deciding where and how to act. At the same time, as you pointed out, we are a very pragmatic organization, which means that in the concessions we might make is like, for example, if we believe that in that area there are like great needs because there's certain people to assist, but that we are not able to go there, but basically having to go in this other area where the needs are as well, important, and that we do not feel that this is a political decision to push us into doing something, then we would very much be ready to do that, hoping obviously to provide us into the but we do make choices, permanently choices. Why are we in Taiz rather than in Adal in Yemen, where it's again a question of opportunities, needs, and realities of where can you work doing what. So we send our teams, they go around, they look at what are the needs, and then they decide to tailor a specific response depending on all these constraints. But again, with always having medical ethics as a clear limit that we wouldn't go beyond that. On the vaccines, it's interesting you mentioned the Nobel Prize, because actually MSF used the Nobel Prize money to create an offshoot which is called the Access Campaign, and the work of the Access Campaign is to make sure that actually the entire name is Access Campaign to Essential Medicine, because our doctors have seen over the course of the year that there is a huge number of neglected diseases which were massive killers, just like malaria, for example, leishmaniasis, that were absolutely not in the radar of R&D of pharmaceutical companies, because they were, of course, not lucrative enough, being mostly disease of poor. So it basically, you put that money into the creation of this entity, which is trying to secure both the access and the prices of molecules to all over the world whenever it's needed. And so they keep working on new files, and one of the latest files, of course, they are part from COVAX, which is an alliance also with WHO, to make sure that the criteria of access to vaccines are the one of vulnerability, whether you are an elder in Sweden or in Mozambique, and making sure that access, the vaccine are spread accordingly even to the poorest country, making sure that that money is available to finance some Ministry of Health that do not have the capacity to buy them, etc., etc. It's not working so well because the repartition for now between the northern and west and southern hemisphere of vaccine is such just a discrepancy. But it's an ongoing, of course, concern for us. Yeah.
Great, Your Excellency.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. Please, I would like to ask this question. Given the fact that conflict prevention should be the priority of all sincere actors, what does MSF have a medium of assessment of crisis situation or conflict situation with a view, in its opinion, to forestall future occurrences of conflicts and understanding of who did what, maybe to any interesting organization like UN or any multilateral organization that has the capacity maybe to prevent conflict situation. I don't know whether.
Yeah, and you mean who did what in a conflict?
Yes,
like accountability. Accountability.
Yes,
for,
with a view to prevent. Giving advice, in your opinion, maybe given that you are always on ground to render the services.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
So on this last part of your question, I mean, we are a medical organization, so we have a very narrow view on the issue of who does what, and that is of concern. And I referenced the United Nations Security Council resolution on the protection of medical mission. This is really, I would say, the scope of the way we look at things in a conflict, to make sure that patients have access to medical care and that medical personnel are able to have access to patients. So on that, we've been, I mentioned the bombing. I mean, we have this very dramatic attack of our hospital in Kunduz in 2015, with 42 people killed by the U.S. Army. We had what we've heard in Syria. There is Yemen. So we kept calling for international mechanism of inquiry, that in each and all of these incidents there should be an independent international mechanism, and in none of these cases it happened. But so the more we've been able to do is calling for that. We don't have the capacity to implement that. And so on a wider scale, conflict prevention, I don't think it's in our remit in any way, because we are, again, narrowly, but it's already complicated enough, focusing on the health of the people we are providing healthcare to.
Thank you so much. I just realized if there's no conflict, then you have much more time maybe to focus on other things.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. We're coming towards the end of the session, and if you allow me, I have 3 questions online.
Okay. Oh, yeah, sure.
I'll share them with you all at once, and then you can respond to them together. The first is about the situation in Gaza and the Israeli attacks on hospitals in Gaza. Was MSF in Gaza during the last round of conflict, war on Gaza? And
2014 or
2014? Yeah, it's very sad. We can't even remember this.
Yeah,
so many
2014. Yeah.
Was MSF present, and what was the reaction of MSF when Israel bombed hospitals? And the second is about, do you ever foresee the development of an Arab chapter for MSF in one of the Arab countries, similar to what you have MSF Belgium, France, I don't know, Switzerland? Is that something that MSF have considered or would be interested in? And the last question, maybe it is related also to what you've already addressed, is there an Arab state? I mean, you mentioned Qatar as being particularly active, but is there a possibility for the state to undertake a humanitarian diplomacy directly, and to turn the table around, that instead of you doing the work and they support you, is there a state who's willing to do this? Can they do it? And the question here specifically about Turkey has been particularly active in the last few years.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think we're in Gaza since the end of the 80s, early 90s. So we have had like a permanent presence. So if the reference is to I think Cast-Led was the last operation, 2014, right? If I'm not wrong, or 16, I forgot. So yeah, we had a presence there, and then we responded. I mean, with more medical action after all the delays to have to bring material and people inside because of the closure. And on the communication side, I'm frankly, I don't remember if we have communicated. I imagine being on the spot, we would have communicated on a possible bombing of a hospital, but very frankly, I don't remember. If this is the question was specifically about communication, or
it's not clear, but maybe I can elaborate on their behalf. I mean, in the region here, there's a particular frustration that when it comes to Israel, all the laws can be bent, and we all turn a blind eye, willingly or unwillingly, and so we give a soft explanation of why the Israelis have had to do this. So it is very uplifting to hear you speak as an independent organization for the. Could you assure the Arab street, the people who are interested? Well, actually, we did stand up to Israel in this particular situation.
Yeah, no, we had the multiple communication. I mean, like criticizing the situation in Gaza and their responsibilities for whether it's a lack of medicine or in time of conflict. So we've been. Whenever we had the elements and reason for that, we've been publicly communicating.
Very good, because as you may have now worked out, by setting up a center here, we are gonna keep an eye on all the operations. We will come back and ask you again.
Rightly so. Absolutely.
Very good.
Sure.
The second question about MSF and the chapter in the Arab world.
Okay, so actually we have since now a year and a half. We have a chapter in Lebanon, so we have MSF Lebanon. We also have an office in Dubai. However, historically, it's an office that we opened, I think, 28 years ago. First in Abu Dhabi, now we moved to Dubai. We're also considering opening an office in Jordan. So yes, we have certainly an increased presence in the region, an increased number of people from the region that have joined our organization.
Arab doctors.
Arab doctors, yeah. I mean, we really they inflated. When I took my position in 2010, there was basically a very small. Historically, MSF was in Africa, in Asia. We had at that time a program in Palestine, in Yemen, Lebanon, and in Iraq, and then suddenly 10 years after, we are in many more countries and in a much different scale as well. So obviously, yeah, we have come across a lot of people who joined us and who are now even moved out of the Middle East as international staff. So it's been a very vivid, I would say, relation and discovery also. Let's be clear. I mean, when I took my position, my ambition was to bring more of MSF to the Middle East and more of the Middle East to MSF, and because it's had very little footprint here. So it's I think it's an ongoing and developing story, and that probably will lead to more and more presence, regardless of what's I think of what's going to happen and the development on the political front in the Middle East. I think that there is, I think for me, what's interesting and I go a bit away from the discussion, but over the last 10 years, what I found very interesting in the region is this empowerment of people, the empowerment of youth, who basically claim their Arab identity, claim their belonging to a region, claim their desire to be more involved. And I mean, it's anecdotal, but I think it's a very interesting example. 2 or 3 years ago, you have one of the biggest Syrian NGO, because you have also like Syria suddenly produced a trove of NGOs, obviously. So that NGO is supported by many international donors, and they had their annual General Assembly for 2 days in Istanbul, and everything was in Arabic. And although most of their funding was coming from Europe countries, they have this 2 days in Arabic, which I found like very positive. So I think that we'll continue to be present and have more and more Arab members in our chapters. Yeah.
Very good. And the last issue was your view on states undertaking humanitarian diplomacy. Maybe here the example would be Aleppo and the break of the siege in Aleppo. To what extent do you think states can and should be directly involved in this sort of thing?
That's a very interesting and
I elaborated a little bit on the question. I must say.
No, but it's a very interesting, because I mentioned Qatar in my presentation, and it's in the region. So no, there hasn't been. I mean, we haven't been approached, or we have not in specific. I wouldn't point out to a specific country that have this ambition to at least work alongside humanitarian organizations. Now, as you said, yeah, Turkey and many countries have their own humanitarian strategies and projections. And then for that, yeah, you have in the region you have many, among which Turkey, which has a very strong presence. And I mean, you probably know where they are, from Somalia to Afghanistan. And so I think it joined the question of your previous question, that we very much welcome that, again, also as long as humanitarian principles are as much as possible respected and at least integrated in the thinking. Even if it's a political choice, at least that the implementation has this dynamic. And I'll finish on Qatar, because I think for me it is more, from what I understood, but you correct me because you're much closer than I am from that. It is more a mediation effort than humanitarian diplomacy, and so that's I think it's a very interesting situation where humanitarians, I mean, are and somehow have to engage with mediators, because we are both trying to walk a fine line between parties to a conflict. We're both trying to look or be as neutral as possible, but at the same time we have very different tools, objectives, and way of functioning. And so I would say it's a very interesting dance around where I think engagement, discussions, and exchanges are necessary, but also making sure that the distinction is made between two activities, which mediation is closer for me to diplomacy, and principal humanitarian action, because mediation can lead to situation or solution that are convenient for the parties that are very far from being humanitarians. And for me also, getting close to mediators, and I have been trying to engage with most of them in mostly Yemen, Syria. It's to make sure we have this engagement, but we make sure also the distinction is clear in their mind. Because for a mediator, what's the base of mediation? It's confidence building measures. To just like start like as an appetizer to the tough issues, you find easy topics. And the lowest hanging fruits for confidence building measures are humanitarian issues. Exchange of prisoners, exchange of wounded people, etc. So, which is fine if, again, it is looked at it on a strictly humanitarian or medical perspective. But it's rarely the case. And I give you one example. If you remember the four-town agreement that was signed in Syria, where basically you have 2 towns in each opposition side, and they were supposed to exchange prisoners and wounded people. But then it became a highly politicized issue, and in one place there are far more wounded than the other, but they ended up negotiating like 1 wounded against 1 wounded, and moving away from humanitarian imperatives. So it's this connection is essential, but also the distinction is important.
Excellent, thank you very much. So really the main, most important point is the need of dialogue and the need of opening channels of communication with all. And I hope that through this forum we play a small role in the Arab world to allow a wider audience to share views with the capable efforts of our interpreters. This is going to be broadcast and transmitted to the wider Arab world in Arabic. It's all been translated. And I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time again to be with us.
Most
and hope
welcome.
that you've also used it as an opportunity to introduce us to you and to the humanitarian world, and then through you we can also communicate with others and invite them all to come to Doha. Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, for participating with us. Thank you to our audience here and online, and to my colleagues who have worked very hard to put this event together in the very difficult time of COVID. We keep always apologizing because usually here we'll have either a breakfast at this time of the day or a dinner or whatever to honor our guests, but with COVID it's not possible. Although we had a very nice dinner at the ambassador's residence. Yesterday it was great. Thank you very much.
Thanks, you, Sultan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.